So we've just finished talking about this question of self-interest, and we will expand a little bit more. But just to kind of give you what you need to be comfortable with. So self-interest, you should be able to identify in any scenario a threat of self-interest and what we would consider to be self-interest. Um, this picture really is to pick up on the threat of self-review. And really, fundamentally, you are looking at your own work. Now, what does that mean? For you to look at your own work, it means you have prepared the work for the client and you are now carrying out the audit. So I guess the problem here is, how can you be independent? Now, remember that I mean, even within the legal profession, you can have two barristers working within the same set of the same chambers. One on acting on behalf of the plaintiff and one acting on behalf of the defendant. Um, so you could technically have the same thing within practice. You could have one team who work on the accounts and prepare the accounts and design the systems, if you like, and put the controls in place. And you can have another completely different team. And when I say that, including engagement partners and senior partners, managing managing the rest, managing the audit. So it's possible. It's possible. But again, you can see the conflict here. How feasible, how easy is it for one to review, so to prepare work and review it and remain objective, right? And not show bias. So self-review threat occurs when an auditor has to review work that they have previously performed. For example, like I said, if the external auditor has prepared the financial statements and then audited them, and there is a risk that the auditor would not identify any shortcomings in their own work. Why would you? And even if they had made mistakes, why would they highlight these mistakes? Um, so that's kind of the issue there. The next threat is this threat of advocacy, or acting on behalf, or acting as a guarantor, acting, if you like, in the interest of your client. So if you were invited to some kind of dinner where you were just saying how amazing the client was, remember, we are independent. We're independent. We literally go into this environment to see whether or not the financial statements are true and fair. So when you start having these type of relationships, then of course we now see a case of bias, because you audit the accounts, you don't prepare, are responsible for the preparation of their own accounts. So the question here is, can you remain without bias if you are an advocate the for the client? Again, like I said here, from whatever, anything where you've been asked to promote their shares or to represent them in court, all of that acts, if you like, um, as advocacy. Now, I'm sure you've heard this phrase that familiarity breeds contempt. The problem with familiarity is that the more and more you know someone, the less likely it is for them to, well, the more likely it is for them to take advantage or to lose sight of that, the objectivity of that relationship. And generally, when you're familiar, you tend to be more sympathetic or trusting, and you're less likely to look into, or even or to lower your expectations. So you just feel it's okay, I'll let it pass, it's okay, I'll you've told me the controls are working, I'll accept that, we've been doing this so many years, let's do this quickly and have a drink. um Key point here is that and that's typically because you're friends, and there's nothing, and we see this very much in the industry where um auditors are brought on because they are close financial director from either because financial directors, it's a finance role as well. So typically they'd met at some capacity, and we'll come to look at where finance directors have even moved audit client or vice versa. So you now have these relationships very much in place, and the families are actually connected. They go on holiday together, their partners are connected, and so you can see the potential for bias. So again, I talked about this here. So the auditor may trust their friends or relatives not to makes mistakes, and therefore not review their work as thoroughly as they should, and therefore you now have this material errors going undetected. Again, just because you have this long association with a client. And I'm not sure if this is the last one, but we'll see. This is the final, it might be the last one actually. Yes, so we've done self interest, self review, familiarity, familiarity, advocacy. Yes, intimidation. So, intimidation does come in different formats. I think it's when you read this and where you just feel that you are being coerced or not just coerced, almost blackmailed into giving the report that the client wants, whether it be the fact that they refuse to pay their fees, or they say something like, "We're going to hold fees until you give us a true and fair report," or um, they physically threaten you that they won't, or they threaten to take work away from you. So this, you can see that what I was talking about, this question of self-interest. If you are dependent on loans with this client, then it is likely that you will not have much of a leg to stand on when it comes to saying no if you feel the accounts are true and fair. So again, in intimidation threat, clients may try to harass or bully auditors into giving preferential audit reports. Again, typically using fees as leverage is popular, and the auditor shouldn't give in to such pressure. And in these circumstances, if you do feel under pressure, then you may consider resigning from such a client. Oh no, that yes. So I've talked. Oh yes, I've talked about confidentiality. So external auditors, again, I talked about this fact that we want to make sure that you can information that you have is kept as such confidential, and again, yes. So the whole idea is that a lot of this I talked earlier on about why it was possible to still have to avoid self review by having different teams in place. So to keep the information confidential. To keep the information um, confidential. And I guess I mentioned this question about information only being disclosed in certain conditions. Yeah, so here we are. The question of conflict of interest, any advice should be given in the best interests of the client. However, where client interests conflict, then you may think that it might not be best. You should think about whether or not you should be working for both of them. I want to show you a quick scenario picture. Let me come out of this. And a very popular, I mean, I got told this when I was studying. It was this question of Ernest and Young many years ago had to choose between Ernest and Young were auditors for Pepsi and Coca-Cola, and as you can imagine, if you were either of these clients, Pepsi and Coca-Cola, you would be concerned that information, and this is again, like I say, a long time ago. So um, you even though Pepsi, even though Ernest and Young would have two separate teams working on these, you would still imagine that neither of these companies, Pepsi or Coca-Cola, would want anyone knowing their trade secrets or knowing that someone might be in an organization who had access to their most intimate personal strategies, because the fear is that these strategies would be stolen and leaked for a price, so to speak, um, to the competitors. So there's a big. You can just Google it, and I'm sure you'll see the article. And Ernst and Young had to make a decision as to who they would carry on auditing, because they couldn't continue to carry on auditing both companies. Yes, so there you are. So if you can, like I said here, you should try your best. I mean, it's not in all scenarios. If you can avoid losing, why would you want to lose these clients? If you can avoid it, then yes. But if it's not possible, then you would have to, again, like I say, think or act in the best interest of independence. And so typically, what we tend to see is you could get asked if you do have the scenario where you now are in a position of a conflict of interest, where you now have within the organization two very similar firms, um, having even though they have completely different partners who have gone out there and found that work. In very different circumstances, it's important to advise both clients in these of this situation, um, and reassure the client that adequate safeguards will be implemented, um, and separate engagement leaders for each of these separate teams to prevent the transfer of client information between teams, as well as a second partner review. So a lot of the time when we come to look at these safeguards, we will see that a lot of something you should always be willing to write is the fact that or discusses this question of having separate teams, having a second partner review, and for quality purposes having an independent partner review the quality of the work. So this is very much the sort of more the steps to manage the problem. And in particular, again, in this scenario here, you want to suggest additional independent advice. And if adequate safeguards cannot be implemented, then the auditor should resign. And that was the case I gave you, the where you saw me actually take you to the to the to the PowerPoints. Right. Right, great. And that's the end of my slide. So what we'll do is again, I'll move on to the next video where I will focus on the actual threats themselves and some of the safeguards put in place that you have to remember and to be comfortable with. Cool, great stuff. See you in the next set of videos.